Okay, good afternoon and welcome. We'll wait just a minute so that we can have viewers come on, but my name is Jimmy Sangenberger. I'm president of the Liberty Day Institute. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Denver, Colorado, but we are national. We're nonpartisan, non-political. All we're about is educating youth on the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and American government. Our goal is to empower teachers with tools and resources to do a great job that we know they do best. We are very pleased this afternoon to be joined by U.S. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who in 2010 was elected to the United States Senate. And as we know, a Senate term lasts 6 years. You have to be 30 years old, 9 years a citizen, and a resident of the state that you are representing in order to be a United States Senator. And so it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome here on the Liberty Day Institute's program, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Senator Johnson, it is a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Well, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to join everybody, and good afternoon. Let me first thank all of you for being interested in the U.S. Constitution. I think it's just a marvelous document. Pardon?
No, go keep
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I heard something there. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for being interested in the United States Constitution, because I think it's just a real marvel. I have a deep respect for the genius of our founding fathers. They were incredibly learned men at a relatively young age. Really studied self-governance and all kinds of governing models, studied in ancient Greek and Latin. They were incredibly intelligent people. But they set up this marvelous these founding documents. And coming from the business world, I'm an accountant by education, but I ran a manufacturing plant for 31 years. I certainly learned that in a business, it was very valuable to have a mission and vision statement. It really set the organization up and kind of got everybody focusing on exactly what the goals were of a particular organization. Well, it also works very well for self-governance. And again, our founders were so intelligent, they created what I think is probably the finest vision statement for self-governance ever created by mankind. It's contained in our Declaration of Independence. And you've probably heard this, but let me repeat it for you. And it goes like this: we hold these truths to be self-evident. By the way, I love that word, self-evident. It's just so obvious that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, one thing I always like to add is that pursuit of happiness thing, that's nothing frivolous. That is something worthy of every human, recognizing that there's no first or second class way of realizing your full human potential, that trying to achieve happiness is going to come through accomplishing things. And that's what I certainly hope, and I'll leave it on this thought before I open up to questions. I hope all of you truly appreciate what your parents are doing for you. Sending you to good schools so you get those tools, what your school administrators, what your teachers are trying to provide you, giving the tools, the information you need to lead a productive and successful life. And then thirdly, I really hope you appreciate how fortunate you are to live in this time, in this place, in the greatest nation in the history of mankind. The opportunities you will have if you utilize those tools that are being given to you in your schools, utilize those tools to seize the opportunities that really are provided really mainly in this country. In the span of human history, it has been this country that has been such a marvel, lifting more people out of poverty and really creating this land as a land of unlimited opportunity. So again, I hope you appreciate that. And with that, I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Well, Senator Johnson, we do have questions that have been provided by students, and I do want to ask you this one to start because it's a very foundational question that goes to the core of what you were just talking about, and that is, what is the U.S. Constitution? What actually is it?
Well, it is our governing document, and what it lays out for is really the structure of government. Article 1 lays out the power of Congress. Article 2, the power of the presidency. Article 3, then the power of the courts. And that's really the basic structure of the United States federal government. you've got three co-equal branches of government. The Congress is the legislative branch. We're the ones that produce the bills that then the president signs, but then the presidency, he's the chief executive. That is really the functioning agencies that carry out the laws that are passed. And then, of course, the courts, really represented with the hierarchy of the Supreme Court, have in many cases the final say in terms of what is constitutional in terms of laws that are passed. So we have those three co-equal branches of government really designed to be checks and balances on the other branches, so that government would never get to the point where it got so large and so controlling that our individual liberty and freedom would be threatened. And that's the most important point to make, is our form of government is supposed to be guarding our individual liberty, our individual freedom. Now, I think those of us that think, I'm certainly one of these individuals, think the government's gotten too big, that is expanded beyond the enumerated powers, and as a result, our freedoms are being slowly but surely eaten away, and that's a bad trend, and we need to reverse that trend.
So when you talk about checks and balances, let's clarify that a little bit. What exactly are checks and balances? And going along with the lines of what you were just saying, what is the purpose of setting up a system where you have three co-equal branches of government in a system where we have checks and balances?
Well, again, our founding fathers came from dictatorial monarchies and aristocracies. And so they were highly concerned. When you have a king answerable to nobody other than himself, there's all kinds of power and control forced on the citizens. And so our founding fathers were first and foremost concerned about preserving individual freedom and liberty. So they wanted to make sure that the government never got so powerful that those freedoms would be threatened. And so the checks and balances, let me give you an example. So Congress passes the law. It has to go through, right there, it's got to go through two houses of Congress, the House and then the Senate, which is pretty difficult to get bills passed. One of the reasons people are so frustrated is democracy is frustrating. So we pass a law. Well, in order for that thing to actually go into effect, the president has to sign it. Now, if the president refuses to sign it or vetoes it, so that's a check on the legislative branch, but then we can check his power by overriding that veto with 2/3 votes in both the House and the Senate. So now we've passed a law, either by the president signing it or vetoing it, and then we override that veto. Well, now you have the Supreme Court. Let's say we pass a law that exceeds our authority of the Constitution. That's what the Supreme Court then steps in and rules a particular piece of legislation unconstitutional, and we go right back to the drawing board. So again, it's each branch can check the power of the other branch, and if it's working properly, it's going to preserve people's individual liberty and freedom.
If you're just joining us on the Liberty Day Institute program this afternoon, we're very pleased to be talking with Wisconsin U.S. Senator Ron Johnson here. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a real pleasure to be with you. Now, I want to ask now the next question, which you touched on a bit before, but I think that it really is helpful to underscore it again. Why did they write the U.S. Constitution, they being the U.S. founding fathers?
Well, again, they came from different countries where you were ruled by kings that had absolute power. And so in order to preserve individual liberty, our founders realized that we were men and we needed some form of governance. But they were very concerned about that form of governance, that government itself would become so powerful and controlled by a few. And so they created this constitution to limit the growth in government. So, in other words, our founding fathers realized we need governance, but they really viewed government as something to fear, rather than viewing government as something to solve all our problems. And I would argue today that's part of our problem, is that so many Americans look to the federal government to solve their problems, and they're finding the federal government's not very good at solving problems. But our founding fathers realized that the government was by and large something to fear, because as it grew, our freedoms necessarily receded or were restricted. So that they created this constitution to try and provide those checks and balances so that government would never grow to a point where it becomes so powerful that individual liberty and freedoms would be infringed.
I think this next question is very interesting. Do you think that the Constitution still works in the 21st century, Senator Johnson?
Absolutely. It's a marvelous document. It would work better if we actually followed it. And certainly as somebody who thinks the government's gotten too big for its own bridges, I think what we really need to do is return to the actual original language of the Constitution and revisit an awful lot of these legal precedents that have been provided over the years by the Supreme Court. And part of the problem with the legal process is that the Supreme Court will take a look at a particular law and they will compare that to the Constitution. And if you've got an activist judge, they may say, well, it's not quite what the Constitution meant, but this is really the fair thing to do. And all of a sudden you create a legal precedent. And then the next case comes up and it's no longer decided necessarily on the original language of the Constitution, but it's based on that legal precedent. So over the decades, the Constitution has been to a certain extent modified by or interpreted by legal precedent. And then the next case establishes another precedent. And before long, all of a sudden your laws are pretty far removed from really what the original language was of the Constitution. So if we would go back to the original intent, the original wording of the Constitution, I think we'd actually be in a better place. And I don't think government would be as big as it is. And I think government would actually be close to the governed, back in control of the states and local governments where problems are actually solved.
Once again, we are talking with Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson here at the Liberty Day Institute. Next question here. What is, in your mind, the most important part of the Constitution?
I would say without a doubt it's the Bill of Rights. And that really lays out our basic rights in terms of freedom. For example, the First Amendment, making sure that we have free speech, freedom of religion, and freedom to petition our government. And of course, you have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. So the Bill of Rights, one of my favorite amendments is the 10th Amendment. And that is really, I've got it stenciled on the wall of my office, as a matter of fact. It's really the amendment that lays out that the only power the federal government has is that's been granted specifically by the Constitution, and all other powers are basically reserved for the states and to the people. And I think if there's been any kind of long-term erosion of our Constitution, it's in the expansion of the federal government powers at the expense of the states and local governments. And we've got to get back to the framework of our founding: government close to the governed, at the state level, at the local level, with individual liberty.
Next question, Senator Johnson, because you already talked about the role that the United States Senate plays in terms of making laws as a part of Congress, we also have the House of Representatives. I want to broaden this next question just a little bit for you. What is your role individually in the government as a senator and in the United States Senate? For example, what are some committees that you're on, some of the things that you are particularly focused on in the United States Senate representing Wisconsin?
Sure. Let me kind of go back to sort of the fundamentals of the Senate. So, and this is true of the House as well. It's set up on a committee system. In other words, we have a number of committees, like Finance Committee. I'm chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. I'm on the Budget Committee. I'm on the Commerce Committee. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. So I'm a pretty busy guy, but we have all these different committees really focusing on individual aspects of the government: foreign relations, our budget, Homeland Security, defense. So the way the system should work is a particular issue comes up. Somebody introduces a piece of legislation. The Senate parliamentarian then refers that to the committee jurisdiction. And so then the committee holds hearings on that piece of legislation. They hold something called a markup, where committee members can offer amendments to hopefully improve that piece of legislation. Then it gets reported out of committee and then hopefully gets brought on the floor of the Senate, where every senator, or in the case of the House, every House member has the opportunity to offer amendments to, again, improve or modify the piece of legislation to represent their constituents. And so my own role is chairman of Homeland Security, Government Affairs. I'm chairman of the European Subcommittee on Foreign Relations. Again, I'm on the Budget Committee. I'm an accountant by training. It kind of makes sense that I'd be involved in the fiscal situation of the federal government. So they keep us pretty busy in the Senate. That's one thing that's universally true.
What would you say is the reason why your job as a U.S. Senator is important?
Because this nation is something precious. I always say that in the span of human history, this 239-year-old experiment is just something precious. And from my standpoint, it's in peril. It's on an unsustainable fiscal path. I don't want to ruin anybody's day, but we literally are mortgaging the future of our young people. We've made all these promises. We really don't have any way to pay for them. And we don't have enough people here that really understand. You know, I'm an accountant. I understand financial numbers, and I can read an income statement, a balance sheet. We don't have enough people here that are really willing to take the risk of understanding it and then conveying those realities to the American public. So, yeah, I'm a citizen legislator. I really am. I think what our founders kind of envisioned, somebody who's had a full career, had a full life, you know, maybe raised a family, and you know, bring that lifetime of experience in the private sector, being governed, and bring that lifetime experience to government, bring that perspective, so that we can actually bring a seriousness of purpose to solving these problems. So that's certainly how I view my role here, is laying out the reality situation, you know, doing my job as chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. I have oversight jurisdiction over the entire federal government. It's a pretty big job, pretty big responsibility, but my approach is, you know, putting my nose to the grindstone, doing my job, holding hearings, you know, highlighting these realities so we can take the first step in solving any problem, which is admitting we've got them.
Let me ask you to expand upon one of the things that you just said, Senator Ron Johnson, our guest here on the program, and that is oversight jurisdiction. When you say oversight jurisdiction, what exactly does that mean, especially in the role of Congress?
Well, it's one of those checks and balances. So you've got the executive, and those are all the federal government agencies that really carry out all the laws and the bills that are passed, all the programs that have been passed through legislation. And then Congress's check on that, to a certain extent, is we have oversight responsibility. So if we see a problem with a program, or we see potentially corruption in an agency, we have the authority to call those members of the administration in, secretaries of the departments or agency heads, to call them in and ask them all kinds of questions. That's what oversight's all about. And you know, we reveal to the public and to Congress any kind of problems so that we can certainly rectify those problems, either through legislation, or you know, sometimes people are terminated, people are forced to resign because they're potentially doing something improper or corrupt. And so it's really, you know, in a bureaucracy, in government, you really need the transparency and the public exposure if you're going to keep government on the straight and narrow, and again, not accumulating too much power and actually following the laws.
When you're talking about your own job, which you were just a little bit ago, Senator Johnson, I want to ask you, where do you work at? And here's an interesting question. What time do you go home, or do you even get to go home?
We're pretty busy now. I worked really hard when I was building my business. Now that I'm a United States Senator, it's almost an order of magnitude more effort and a lot of work. So I generally start my day, you know, 6:30, 7 o'clock. I start calling the radio program so that you know, certainly the citizens of Wisconsin understand, you know, where I stand on different issues, you know, what my viewpoints are. Try and get in the office about 7:30, and then it's a very full day. There's not a minute to spare. Committee hearings, all the multiple committees I'm on, taking votes, meeting with constituents as they come in from Wisconsin, and you know, getting educated in terms of the problems they're having and navigating the federal government. And you know, then there are generally events at night, and you know, hopefully I'm back at my townhouse by 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. But they're pretty full days. And then of course, when we're in the state, a lot of times I'm getting up 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, hitting the road, start doing the first event 7:30, 8 o'clock, and hopefully get home by 10 or 11 o'clock at night as I'm traveling all over the state. So it's if you like to sleep in a lot, if you don't like working too many hours, trust me, you wouldn't want to be a U.S. Senator.
Do you enjoy your job as a U.S. Senator?
Well, it's certainly interesting. It's important. I didn't do it to have fun, but I tell you, I really do enjoy it, particularly when I'm back in the state. Wisconsin is such a beautiful state, and I generally drive myself around the state. I love to drive. I love driving through the beauty and bounty that is Wisconsin, and I just love talking to people. I'm a pretty sociable guy, so I love talking to all the good folks in Wisconsin, my constituents, telling them about what's happening in the federal government, listening to their concerns.
Once again, we are talking with U.S. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon in that busy schedule, as we know you have committee hearings and so many other things that are going on, as you've just been explaining. I want to ask you this question. This is an interesting one about the President of the United States and the Electoral College. What would you say is why we have an Electoral College instead of going by the popular vote? And how in the world can we increase the number of people who are in the Electoral College, at least representing individual states, I would say?
Well, that's all. I mean, the Electoral College is all divvied up based on population, and that continues to change. There was always, the great compromise as our founders were arguing over the Constitution and exactly how we set this up as a republic with individual states with their own state sovereignty. How do you balance the fact you got these big states that really could influence things to an outsized degree, and the real grand compromise was really setting up a chamber that was based on population, which is really what the Electoral College is set up to basically mimic that, and then the Senate, which was set up to have 2 senators per state, and that really preserved the rights of the smaller states. And so you could kind of argue the Electoral College is sort of kind of is a little bit of a compromise even there, although it's far more representative and far more aligned with the popular vote than you would. But each state can decide whether it's a winner-take-all system. Some states actually apportion their electoral votes based on their population. That's a really decision for the states to make themselves.
Excellent. Now, just a couple more questions before we give you the chance to state some final words. Is there anything in the Constitution that you might think should be changed or potentially added to the Constitution?
I would say that the problems I have in terms of our government is not the Constitution, which, by the way, is not that simple a document. A lot of people say it's really not that long, but it's obviously subject to interpretation, and it's been subject to interpretation for more than 200 years. And as I was describing earlier, different people can take a look at the same sentence, the same section of the Constitution, and come up with completely different interpretations of it. So it's really not that simple. I guess where I would have where I would argue, or where I would have some differences, is really how the Constitution has been interpreted over the years. And I think in many respects, so we've certainly exceeded the bounds. The federal government has gone way beyond the enumerated powers of the Constitution. I think we'd be far better off if we, again, looked at the original content, tried to start limiting the federal government, kind of put it back in the constraints of the enumerated powers, and then send the rest of those programs and those powers back to the states, where I think a lot of that stuff really should reside.
Now, why do you think it's important for students across Wisconsin and throughout the country to learn about the U.S. Constitution and our government system, and I would add, to be involved in it?
Well, because we are men and women, and we need governance. Without governance, your society would break down to total chaos. So we need a civilized society. So you need government. But again, as our founders understood, as government grows, our individual liberty and freedom necessarily recedes. Now, we give up some of that freedom. I mean, you could argue, for example, a basic speed law. You say, well, that limits my freedom. I want to go 100 miles an hour on that highway. But we all, because of self-governance, we realize, yeah, but that would be pretty dangerous. It would cost people's lives. So we basically accept the governance of speed limit laws to preserve safety and security for our fellow citizens. But again, if government gets too large and becomes too controlling, our liberties could be restricted beyond what we think is reasonable. And so to be involved in that process, to be able to make those collective judgments in terms of how much should we restrict our liberty for a sense of safety and security, is really kind of the basic trade-off between government, in terms of safety, security, and individual liberty. So these are always very important questions, and I think just about every issue that we're debating is always kind of coming down on the difference between individual liberty versus some sense of safety and security. And that's why you have to be involved, or else you're going to just be subject to other people's opinion.
Now, the reason we are talking with you this afternoon, Senator Ron Johnson, our guest representing the state of Wisconsin in the United States Senate, is because today is Constitution Day. What do you think is so special about the Constitution? I know you talked about this in the beginning. I want to go back to it. What do you think is so special about the Constitution that we might take a day to acknowledge it? And really, there's a week, Constitution Week, from September 17th through the 23rd is when it's called Constitution Week. But during this period of time to reflect and to talk about the Constitution, maybe to go home to mom and dad and ask them for their thoughts and share some of the things that they've learned. Why do you think that's important in recognizing Constitution Day?
Because when you, again, look at the span of human history, there's never been a document of self-governance that's been so successful. Because of its concentration on the preservation of individual liberty, it's allowed a free market competitive system to be established and to grow. I mean, what is remarkable about America is this marvelous free market economy that produces somewhere between 20 and 25% of all the goods and services in the world when we only have 5% of the world's population. Now, that's possible, not because of big government, but because of individual liberty. We're a society with people that aspire to build things, to create things, to innovate things. And we have a governing document, the Constitution, that preserves the freedom and liberty of those individuals to be able to earn their own success, to be able to create things without undue restraint by the federal government. Now, it's not perfect. It's not perfect freedom. It's not absolute liberty. But again, when you take a look at all the other models ever tried in human history, you take a look at examples of communism and socialism, those economic models have always failed. Our model, based on this constitutional self-governance, individual liberty, which has allowed the free market competitive system to create this marvel of an American economy, that's what's so important about it.
Now, before we let you go, Senator Ron Johnson, our guest here at the Liberty Day Institute, I want to ask you to take the opportunity to let students know that are watching this now, either live or in the recording that will be posted on YouTube immediately afterward, what anything else that you would like to share with them?
Sure. I actually come from a business background, and so I did a lot of negotiating. I'll guarantee I didn't sit down at the negotiating table and start arguing right off the bat. I would always spend a lot of time on the front end of those negotiations, laying out all the areas of agreement. It allowed me to develop a level of relationship and trust so that when it came to the areas of disagreement, and let's face it, no two people agree on everything, it was a whole lot easier finding common ground. So as you start talking and getting involved in the political system, I guess what I would always start the conversation with is an area of agreement. We really do, as Americans, I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum, we share the same goal. We're concerned about each other. We all want a safe and prosperous and secure nation. We all want every American to succeed, to have the opportunity to build a good life themselves or families. So let's not question each other's motives, and let's concentrate on the things that we can agree on, that unite us, rather than exploit the things that divide us, the differences. And if we do that, there are so many things. Like I say, that goal of having a prosperous, a safe, secure America that is a land of unlimited opportunity. If we concentrate on those areas of agreement, just like it certainly worked for me in business, it can work for us in terms of self-governance as well.
It's sort of like what we say here at the Liberty Day Institute is that the Constitution is for everybody, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, the Constitution is there to protect everybody, right?
It is, absolutely.
All right, Senator Ron Johnson, thank you so much for your time this afternoon here with the Liberty Day Institute. We are very pleased to have this opportunity and to share it with the students throughout Wisconsin. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity. Have a great day.
All right, you as well, sir. Thank you very much for watching the Liberty Day Institute. For more information and details on what we do and what we offer, go to libertyday.org. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your afternoon. This will be posted immediately on YouTube, and we will make the link readily available on our social media at youtube.com/LibertyDayUSA and at facebook.com/LibertyDayUSA. Once again, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, president of the Liberty Day Institute. We thank Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin so much for this exciting opportunity, and thank you for participating. Have a great day and happy Constitution Day.